these sort of color assumptions. And I will show you other projects where I work with that. And then that same piece was in an exhibition at the Hammer. And this room at the Hammer is really tricky because it's essentially a lobby. And so it has, I don't know, I kind of wanted to pretend it wasn't there, but I also wanted to depend upon it. And so, for instance, this kind of horrifying glass blockade or barrier, banister, I just decided to go right through it. And all these things that I found sort of frustrating about the space sort of taught me lessons about my work that I was sort of grateful for eventually. And for instance, the lights, you really can't adjust the lights. So I built these pieces around the lights, and then I got this sort of surprising ghost because of the adjacency of the surface to the light. And I would never plan that. This extreme drop down, I don't know, the fire marshal came in and was like, this is going to be a hazard, and we had to make some adjustments with sort of motion through it, and I decided to make this kind of way to get in to the piece. And I hung it at pond level. I thought it was sort of waist high, and then attached the bass strings with black to the orange strings, which then sort of had this hovering, this kind of mysterious kind of attachment system. And then this piece, this kind of shadow opportunity, was something that I also hadn't anticipated. And then, because the space is so broken up and odd, I decided to take advantage of these pockets of dead space and put these little birdcage sculptures in, which were portraits in a way, or they have stories in them that are stories that are about things that matter to me, like I have insurance for a self-employed person, so my personal clippings ended up in parts of the bird cages, or junk mail that seemed targeted to me became these birds. But it was sort of like if a viewer discovered one of these pieces, they might get the sense that there were more, and that maybe the art was watching them, but they weren't seeing everything. But kind of this sense of the show wasn't really over. So these little cages became these sort of devices for the space. And this piece was at a decommissioned synagogue in France. And one of the things that was interesting about this space was the ceiling was really falling apart. And I wanted to do this piece, but we had to build a sort of inner structure of the ceiling, which in many ways has sort of driven the work I do today, was this sort of solution to a crumbling ceiling. And one of the conditions of the space was that the viewer would go upstairs as the exhibition continues. But so I wanted it to feel like we were entering a swimming pool, and knowing that the viewer was going to go upstairs, then here's this, I don't know, you see this sort of diagonal lines that we then suspended the piece from. And you have the sense that the space is, the pool is below, the sunset's above, or this kind of salmon, this space is really painted this sort of soft salmon. And the viewer would go upstairs and look down, there's this piece that you could go inside of. But what really would happen if you anticipate walking into a pale, soft peach space was actually a really, really aggressively painted diagonal striped, like safety stripe floor that then threw the light coming through the windows and did this kind of blending and did this sort of effect of mixing color. And then I just had these more cages, more stories throughout. And I always think it's important to show some projects that I love to do, but it's an interesting process for me to make them because I don't really understand how. I don't know the process, and so I need people to help me. And this is an ornamental bed made out of a material called corian. And if you know corian, it's like a sort of, I would think it was like the bastard child of stone and plastic. It's this really ambiguous, but super cold material. And I wanted it to be run through a router, a CNC router, which is driven by a computer, but I have to have someone help me develop the tool path. And it's almost like when I use this kind of machinery, I kind of want to deny it. I want to deny it its full desire to be perfect. And a CNC machine being computer driven it's very easy for it to do something very exact. And I wanted to get this feeling of something in between or something that's kind of just not quite right, or something that's broken. But also let the machine create a magic that it doesn't really know, like how does Corian become quilted fabric, and to kind of have this kind of confusion and this ambiguity, but then have this kind of suspended ornament, or this process of removal instead of adding be a way to create ornament. So this feeling that this thing is incomplete and asymmetrical, and that's the ornament, is the removal of material, like scar tissue. And then I made one out of plywood, which just took advantage of the natural sort of layering to give this kind of psychedelic, to kind of exploit a potential psychedelic quality. Also to have the burning, like taking the tool a little too far and getting it to start to burn and maybe catch fire, or just on the point of destruction, then pull it back. And then have this kind of quilted wood. And I decided I really wanted to do a whole room of paneling. It's an expensive process, so I just did the 16-foot section. But then to also have this, just going to the point where the material is almost destroyed. And, again, I don't know how to do this. I don't really, I kind of have an understanding, but I could probably never do this by myself. So I depend on people, and that's part of the, I have to have different tolerances for my expectations. Sometimes it's something different, and that's okay, and sometimes it has to be a certain way, but I very much depend on certain people to help me. And again, just going really far into the wood. And this is someone I depend on very much, who's overseeing the installation here today, Jay Yan, here from Los Angeles. I wanted to just point out that this is done with a lot of help. A lot of this work is done with people. And the piece out there is also kind of a extension of my interest in graphic design, super graphics, printed matter. And I've been lucky enough to be able to do some publications for museums and also some artists that I know. And I think it's like I don't really. When I was in art school, there was a sort of a crossover of what was a very traditional way of making a book that I didn't have the skill to do, and not the patience. And then that was the very time when computers were really being embraced in art school, and that allowed me to do stuff that I'd always really longed to do, which was printed matter and graphics. And so here's just some books. Here's some display of some books that I've done, cards, magazines. This is my entire art center education, all the Xeroxes that they give you that you pretend to read. I just bound them together in a book because I couldn't throw them out because I don't know, I felt too guilty. So I just kind of organized them into a multi-volume set. And this is a catalog for an artist, Jorge Pardo, where it's actually a very traditional catalog. There's a text, there's an interview, there's a bibliography, biography, but in the place of any image, which would show, if you were to have this catalog after the show is done, you would not really get a sense of the exhibition. So this really stands in for an image. So this multi-piece catalog then becomes this thing that really demonstrates the interest of the artist and me with the exhibition. And this is a really fun project that I did for 2 years. And the gallery I worked with in Berlin just gave me took out the third or fourth page in freeze and just gave it to me every month and said, do whatever you want. You don't have to use the gallery information, you just do whatever you want, which for me is very exciting because I love seeing something printed. And I love the idea of this kind of distribution. And so I decided to take the approach of the designer Vera, the textile designer I was interested in, and just kind of look at the world in terms of its potential to become a graphic. And then use the information from the gallery as a sort of raw material, or sort of a matrix by which to process some of these other sort of small fleeting interests. So here's artists that they work with. And one of the things that I like that if you have these 2 years of the magazine, you have sort of an exhibition in a way. Like none of this became a silkscreen edition or anything, but there's this sort of ad infinitum viewer that I'm interested in, that someone in Mexico City can have the show, and someone in Iceland can have the show, and somebody in Los Angeles can have this sort of small body of work. And I think that's really nice. I was really interested in the palette of Pae White, and I was interested in the back of a free magazine in Los Angeles called the LA Weekly, and how the massage section in the back was getting bigger and bigger, and all the framing was getting very competitive, and the way the devices at the masseuse were trying to, how they were trying to stand out, and I just loved that. So I decided to use that as an ad. I wondered why this British candy looked so Japanese. You know, they're just kind of asking these questions in print. And then I started to use my scanner as a photo studio, and the gallery's name is in there. Neuger Rimschneider is in there in Noodles. And then I did textiles. They seemed very office, you know, really focused on being in the office, and I thought that was related, and this is a good relationship with that. And this was something I loved doing, which was a few years ago, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but one of the things I really love about this project is that I love when the artists use the tube map palette, because it's so strange to me how it works so well, that colors that seem somewhat incongruous seem to make sense with the tube map, and essentially use those colors as sort of threads, and also this idea of magical transport, and a flying carpet, and this thing being like a fragment, and this incompleteness being on the page. All these things kind of, you know, knowing that this would be printed for 2 months, and then it would be in the trash. And it's pretty interesting to be on the tube and watch someone pull one of these out and barely look at it, and really not care that much, but even just for a second, it's still kind of a nice thing. And you know, I find this very thrilling, you know, that this kind of distribution and this kind of temporariness happens, that can happen with an artwork. This is another transportation-related project, and some of the things that happen in the United States with public art is that they bring an artist into a neighborhood that the artist has no connection to, and they say, well, tell the neighborhood who they are. And I find that very condescending in a way. So when I was invited to do one of these projects, I decided to go into the MTA and sort of find out who they were. And I went into their deep storage and found these really strange bus tickets that had these very intriguing symbols and graphics. And I decided to kind of cull from those and make the largest sculpture I probably will ever make, and design this sort of fabric with these kind of mysterious symbols, and then included my husband's and my initials in there just for kicks, and they went ahead and printed it and ran it, and this is system-wide, I think. But it's so it just kind of, I like this kind of relentlessness, this kind of endlessness, and this kind of dispersion of this piece. And I guess it's also been very graffiti resistant, they say, so it's a big bonus. And this piece actually has a relationship to the piece in the South London Gallery, and this has been a very important part of my life for many, many years, where an extension of my studio practice is to run for an hour every other day, and this is a part of my run. And I recently wasn't able to continue doing that, but I like that this by Botanical Garden, so the kind of the debris around this part of town is very unique, very unusual. It's always changing with very exotic plants that aren't typical, but I decided to kind of scoop this up and kind of make a portrait of this gutter at this time in November in Pasadena in 2007, and just have craft these leaves out of this metal and canvas, and have this sort of verisimilitude of that place and those conditions. The ginkgos are yellow, the eucalyptus are thin, other leaves are intermixed. And my gallery in Los Angeles has a secret fireplace that I really had to persuade them to reveal, and brought used that as a sort of architectural opportunity for displaying these gutter leaves and some other pieces. But they're very, they're very sort of delicate, sort of little, almost like little paintings. And this is my sort of cover sheet for a competition that I won in Norway for the Opera House in Oslo. And the architects for this opera house are super interesting, named Snoetta. And when I met with them, they were very expansive, I could tell. And I asked them what color were the seats going to be, and they said, oh, we're going to invent a color. I thought, okay, well, then that means I need to really think in terms of the stage curtain can be really anything in the world. And I kept kind of going back to a big chunk of metal, being, why can't we just do just a big chunk of metal up and down for a stage curtain? And as I got further into the research, I came across, this is the building. It's very minimal in a way, but it really integrates, it's very integrated into the landscape, into the fjord, and also the passing through the ground plane and the roof kind of merge. It's very simple interior, not anything that has any kind of ornament, what feels like what it was for acoustical reasons. This is one of my boards. But I ended up, came across a process that I continue to work with today. And this is my image that I worked on with a photographer. And I won the competition, but I wanted to have this material. This is actually a digital, it's a digital weaving. And it's cotton polyester. I wanted this really basic material, like cotton polyester, that's fairly inert, to maybe have a fantasy of becoming transformed, or to become silver, or to become magical. And so maybe this curtain is in costume, maybe this cotton is in costume in some way, and this is how it looks in this space. But also when I worked with the photographer, I knew what the seat color was going to be, I knew what the wood was going to be, so we had these colors adjacent to the foil, so it picked that up very clearly, and so when you're in the audience, you might believe that it is being reflected, and that you're being reflected, and that you might sit there and look for yourself, which I think is what happens in these kinds of productions, when you think that the story might have some connection with you. So it's this kind of pre-theater entertainment. And that's for scale. And my thumbprint, it's a very fine, it's a very detailed process. They captured my thumbprint, and that's the signature in the stage curtain. But I've continued this process of the digital weaving, and I've worked with smoke and a number of other subjects. But what's interesting for me about the smoke is that it's like the foil in a way. It's like the scale of these large-scale tapestries has a history of paying tribute to some historical event or monumentalizing something important. And I want to take this idea of smoke changing or something changing so quickly and memorializing that. Light moving so subtly on something reflective, and this freeze framing that, memorializing that into this large scale. And I think what's different about it, as opposed to like a digital photograph, when it's woven, it's kind of a detail. When it's woven, it's somehow more embedded in a way. Like the idea of time is sort of more critical in like the fact that this thread is kind of locking into another. And this was at the Whitney Biennial on the floor where they had mostly film and video. And I was really happy with the location of that because it really felt like this banner for discussions about time. Those ideas of movement in space. And my favorite way that these have ever been installed is in Site Santa Fe, New Mexico, where these pieces become sort of architectural in a way, and they're these free-floating walls. And there isn't really any privileging of the fronts because the backs also tell very interesting stories of their own making. And I don't know if I have any pictures here of the backs, but yeah, so you can see like some of the backs are even more compelling in a way. Like, I didn't really want to privilege the fronts as much. And this series, I did a few of these series a few years ago where I just kind of took what I was working on in the studio, and I just made these portraits that this I was walking every morning, and this poison ivy, and then these cookies were in my studio, and I was cutting paper for this, and this kind of was going through this kind of A to Z of what I was working on at the time, which would have changed in an hour. The stuff just moved around, sort of make them into tapestries. And this one was made from a very small little weaving that I found for $3. And it's something that somebody's obviously spent a lot of time making, and there's a lot of intimacy with this kind of process of its macrame with all these different, specifically chosen yarns and wools and silks. And so I scanned it and then had it run through this industrial loom. I just wanted this this little thing to tell this big machine something about love and something about time and attention, something that maybe this big machine had left so far behind in its sort of industrialness, and to have this kind of conversation between processes. And it's called Sea Beast, and it's just this thing that became big and a big slug. And I recently had an exhibition in Dusseldorf where I was able to show these very large, 26-foot tall tapestries, which again are just studio debris. That's tissue paper, stuff that was about to go away, newspaper clippings. This piece, so this piece was in 2007 in Münster, Germany. And it's a project where it happens every 10 years, and the sculpture is very big. It's everything very site-specific and sort of these important pieces and the landscape. And I was really interested in trying to figure out a way to find a different type of site and a different type of engagement with the city, and have something that was bigger than anything, but also something very intimate. And so I did 3 projects. One of the things that struck me about the city were the bells everywhere. And this is a city that was bombed out in the war, but they had reconstructed many of their bells. And they were really everywhere. So I decided that I was going to try to program the bells to play love songs that were important to me and at one point, and have them go off in whatever state they were in. And so maybe there was a sort of brokenness to the bells, but that maybe that's another story about love, that it's not quite always perfect. And to have these things go off all at once and then get into sort of the molecules of the people in the city, that it would just somehow be in them. It would be in every crack and crevice all at once, and then it would just disappear. And so we programmed not that bell, I think it was 5 bells in the city. And this one was the most complete carillon bell, 26 bells. And they were in that tower, that little tower. And the thing that managed this massive sort of building of these bells was this little keyboard. It's like the Wizard of Oz little magic keyboard that we had to create this unit, this digital device to interpret the music files to MIDI files that then would hit the keys and on and on. And that was interesting. These I think are super beautiful bells. They're from the 60s. They're porcelain, and they're outside of a kitchen shop. And we got these fired up again. They were sort of like architectural ornament that had this potential for music. So we got those working. And the songs that the bells played, we had Pet Shop Boys' Rent, Shake Your Booty, Up, Up and Away, You'll Be a Woman Soon, and there's something else I'm forgetting, but this, I'll play a little bit of Pet Shop Boys. But that's okay. I mean, but I actually did pass someone on the street, and they were singing the song, you could hear them kind of whistling. That's what I really wanted, was to kind of get in there. The other project I did was working with this pastry shop, and I mean, I have to say, when I come to Europe, I really respond to these things that I don't find in the United States, like a German pastry shop really resonates with me. And I kept finding excuses to have meetings at this place related to the project, and then I started to realize that this was a very legitimate site for me, that this should be considered an important site for sculpture, and how do I get people in there? And how do I interface this cliche of Germany with the cliche of where I live in East LA, which, you know, well, this is the interior. And I found these just beautiful moments of layers of generations. You can see where they brought in this fish tank in the 70s, but they were using these cups from maybe the 50s, and I wanted that to be part of my project. And they do this. And this is part of my story. The cliche of my neighborhood is this, and so I wanted to kind of have this coming together of these. And this is what they do very well there. And so my assistant and I, we didn't want them to say 9, so we made our own version of marzipan tacos. So we then sent it to them so they knew it was possible. So they interpreted our interpretation. And they did this with the paper plate and everything that was just great. And I really love packaging and design and stuff like that. It's very traditional. I always wanted to make one of those stickers that kind of commemorates the project. But this thing that you could buy for 17 euros and you could eat it. And so you have this sort of thing that has a kind of intimacy, also this small sculpture with this kind of, have this big sound piece and then this kind of small thing you can take with you. And they are really good at doing display, so I didn't have anything to do with it, and I just gave them the things to present, and they just went ahead and made this truck, which was really great. But one of the things they did do, which I stopped, they made a special plaque and I had them change it to just, I wanted to keep it within the design vernacular that they already used there in the pastry shop. A few years ago, I was given this humongous space in Venice Biennale, and it hadn't been open for forever, it seemed like. And it was beautiful, and I really fell in love with this space. And it was, it's called the Isolotto, and it was this big space that had this kind of ambiguous indoor-outdoorness, and it just, I spent quite a bit of time in this space, but I kept thinking of the stories the space was telling me, and kept thinking also of the birds of Venice, and I wanted them, I heard that they had passed a law where if you fed the birds, you'd go to jail, and maybe that's an exaggeration, but I wanted them to bring the birds in. I wanted some invitation to have that possibility. And also have the viewers come in and appreciate this architecture somehow. So I planned out a sort of tapestry drop ceiling piece that would create a kind of sort of openness, but also a space that felt comfortable and was intimate, and then had these chandelier pieces that penetrated as a sort of device to have the viewer's eyes go through the drop ceiling and onto the space beyond. And these chandeliers were also these sort of invitations for the birds. So this design also had these cups, and then some of them were completely encrusted with birdseed, and then I was able to get these amazing people to come into the space, and I'll show you a sample of what they're from the region. So these guys are called Kiakor. I can't say it right now. They are a bird. This is like a 700-year-old tradition of hunting birds through mimicry, and it was very important for me to have them in the space and really feel like viewers and feel very stealth. I mean, this guy would be like checking his cell phone and be very much integrated with the people in there looking at the work, because what would happen is the verisimilitude was so perfect that the viewers would look everywhere for the birds, and what they ended up doing is looking everywhere at the building, which is what I really wanted, was this kind of appreciation for the space and the architecture and the little dark crevices and the piles of construction debris. So it was really nice. And part of my deal with them was that they would have these annual competitions, and I designed their poster. And this relates to the show also. A few years ago, the director of the museum in Los Angeles, a very controversial move, a commercial gallerist took over the museum, MoCA, Museum of Contemporary Art. And one of the first exhibitions he did was called the Artist Museum, where he did this sort of outreach of the museum to the art community in Los Angeles, and did this sort of big exhibition. And he asked me to design this sort of, or develop this sort of brand, which I would love to do. And I wanted to do this kind of painting piece, this kind of painting font. But I wanted every situation that this would be advertised to be a little bit different. So there would be this familiarity, but every, format or black and white. One of the things that I knew was going on with this show was that he was trying to sort of get the affection of the artists in Los Angeles sort of be on his side. So I presented this logo option that he actually used. And I don't know what happened to that last slide. Well, anyway, there were a bunch of different variations which aren't there. And then he also invited me to do a project in this really horrible space in the museum that is this kind of joining corridor between the two spaces. The two larger parts of the museum come together here. And one of the things that was happening in the show, which I wasn't such a fan of, was that they were really breaking it into these sort of ghettos. Here's a light space, here's pop, here's ABX. And so I decided to use this kind of corridor, this kind of idea, this bridge, as this way to have a hybrid of those things. So light space, super graphics, pop. It's this very long space, and I was thinking about hot dogs, and so I decided to do this kind of string piece. Here's the mustard, this is a rendering. This is a ketchup, it's a long space, so we didn't write relish, we wrote pickle, and then developed this kind of string piece with this sort of undulation that takes one through this space in this kind of off corridor. And then this was supposed to be, this is some other device I'm not going to get into. But this became sort of extrapolated upon for a large-scale project in Los Angeles at the LAX airport, which I'm still sort of working through. And they have a situation, which you can kind of see here, but when you go through this, it's called a sterile corridor. When you go through it, it's sort of a trade-off to have this openness and this glass, is to have the security cable at 4 inches distance at the top. And their fears that you're going to throw a firearm. I don't know why, but you're going to throw something over. So this cabling system is supposed to prevent that. And I decided to take that cabling system and make it somehow an artwork. Take this kind of practical thing and make it somehow lovely, I guess. Make it more poetic. And so we worked through this process of this integrated artwork system for a really long time, and then found out just at the very end that we couldn't do it, and would I sort of look at something else. But this is just some of our, the carpet's pretty bad. But this thing that would be like this endless big thing, that just everywhere you looked from below, you would see this kind of cloud of security, this kind of soft security. And this is a project where the process has really shaped the artwork in a way that I actually can't believe I really find interesting. But when we were told that we couldn't do this integrated system, it was almost like we can walk away, or we can find a way to adjust. And so I decided to go to this idea, which was my original idea, and figure out a way to make it interesting. And I became less and less interested in the threads and more interested in a system of attachment. And we came up with a system that was more budget-friendly and ridiculous, which I like, because it's a very big corporate building, and then to have this kind of thing that's sole function is to hold up a piece of thread and have it look so baroque. And then maybe we make it, a really weird color with a mysterious name, and do this kind of series of profiles, or do these profiles that then maybe get chromed, and then they are kind of in a way working. I don't know what they're doing actually, but just this sort of oddity within this really sort of gridded formal airport, and maybe they're rose gold. So I'm sort of in process with this. And I'm going to jump through this project in Miami because I think we're running out of time. In some buildings I'm developing in San Diego for a big project down there, and was invited to be an artist on an artist team and recommend my own work. It was the strangest situation with, it seemed like a conflict of interest, but they had these, I think they wanted a thing in their park and that's it, but I saw these kind of opportunities in these pavilions, and the future doesn't look like this now, but the future is all this development, and all these buildings represent viewers, and the thing that's interesting about San Diego is the airport is almost inside the city, so these planes are constantly really close and dramatic and so beautiful. So I wanted to sort of look at the sky as the viewer, and that as an opportunity, and take hold of these pavilions and claim them for art, as art, because they seem very undecided. And so these are very old renderings, but start by having this kind of a brise-soleil, this kind of text pavilion, this horizontal brise-soleil, and then account for the viewer in the sky, account for the birds, the airplanes, but then also have this connection to the ground plane and have this kind of shadow and light. And then take these words and make these extrusions and challenge a cafe or an information building to try to work within a serif or a font, or try to have operations within this extreme environment. And then have these things become kind of like lanterns at night. And I also sort of took the opportunity to claim this bathroom that nobody seemed to want, and then take that brise-soleil idea but kind of solidify it and have this possibility at night and arrange the words. Maybe they end up like this, but play with these words in such a way that certain things can happen, and have the interior this bright, bright, bright color that through this sort of proximity to the floor, you might get this kind of fade that I had done in that synagogue, that there might be this balance of diminishing color. This project at the Art Institute in Chicago was pretty interesting site condition. And every time I went there on site and did a site visit, all the viewers just walked right beyond the sculpture and went directly to this view. And I thought, that it just troubled me. So I wanted to do something, a giant, giant super graphic that the environment, that the viewers who go into that space are the thing, they are the volume. And so kind of presenting this sort of stage with this idea that maybe this like comic book rainbow, Superman fell from the sky, got trapped into this space, and this kind of spinning of this thing in this space, but radically control the viewing experience with this sort of oculus that reduces the view to something much smaller. And I just wanted this sculpture to be a membrane, this thing to be just a giant sticker. And I really wanted to work with this material on the ground plan, this advertising material that they do on city streets. And this is currently installed in an unopened airport in Berlin. Friends have read about this. And it was a competition where I was invited to submit. And that I tend to take that a little more seriously, because then I feel like they're familiar with the work and they like it. But all the competition material was in German, so I thought, well, I'm never going to win. And I knew the other artists, many of them were German. I thought, well, I'm never going to win. And I just started to develop this complete fantasy with very little regard to the budget, and developed this kind of flying carpet in the space, this magical transport, and then it won the competition, and I had to really scramble to figure out a way to make this thing. And it's massive, massive airport, and the way that the architecture is set up is that there aren't a lot of supports in the space, so it really feels massive. There's not a lot of vertical interruptions. And find a material that was forgiving, that it doesn't have to be technically perfect. And I think in this really kind of corporate architect space with so linear, to develop this kind of beast, this kind of chaotic monster. I'm kind of showing you process shots here, but this is all metal. So create this giant drawing that almost feels like it's unraveling in the space. see, here's a shot of it. So it's this big, kind of like a tapestry, or like a carpet drawing that undulates, made from this very, very thin material, and but also it's this thing that in the space is the thing becoming undone in the space that's so organized. You can kind of see it. This piece is very much, this is the beginning of what we're looking at in the space. And this piece was in Philadelphia a few years ago at the Fabric Workshop in the museum. And it's a very old, the space I got in this building was a very old brick walled space. And another long space, at the time I was developing this piece, an artist that I had been close to and was important to me in Los Angeles committed suicide. And our studios were kind of close together, or they were, you know, in the same neighborhood, and I came across this graffiti, Hasta la Muerta, see you in death, and decided just to use that and make this piece, giant graphic in the space, pulling from the wall and terminating into a brick wall that as soon as we started to go into it, it started to kind of spill its guts and all this kind of dust and debris, which I decided to leave on the floor. I don't know if I have an image here. But it doesn't look that red, but this kind of red stuff was all along the wall. And then in the back room, this adjoining space that was actually open, had this other thing, this other component, which I kind of have in this room here. And this is a mini bar, which I've always been fascinated with hotel mini bars, as this kind of holds all this promise and expense and mystery, and put something else that's always intrigued me, this hygrothermograph in there, which was meant to sort of read the life in the room and the humidity, and then put it inside the mini bar, so it just sort of flat lines. This is a piece that has been in development for the Gloucester Road Tube Station, and it's a giant neon piece that is taking into account viewers that move through that space and viewers that sit on and are exposed to that space. But it's a neon piece that uses the kelvins that are found in daylight. So it's like a giant seasonal affective disorder light. And this is a test of many, it's a huge piece, a test of 5 layers of the panels. So you can see it kind of progress. So the idea that you might just, even as you're passing through, get some sort of wash of optimism or some sort of wash of positivity, even if you're not even in front of it for that long, but maybe it's in motion, you get this exposure. So that has an uncertain future. Kind of getting close to the end here. I thought I would just show some smaller pieces that I work on from time to time when I want the experimentation to be a little bit more manageable. And these are pieces that I make with a laser, and that I found the blackest surface I could find, which is a clay, wax, India ink material on panel. And then when I put it through my laser, something I don't really know that much about how to work it, I start to remove the surface, and it brings forward what I feel is like light. And the more you remove, the more light is revealed. And through kind of layering, you get this kind of flowing. And it's sort of interference patterns I get thrown on top of the surface. And maybe it even feels like fabric a little bit. And it almost feels like, I think this is one of the cataracts, or there's something cloudy in front of the eyes. It's very, just barely there. And I decided to take one of these horrible contracts that I have to face sometimes with these bigger projects, and I call this piece Making Ugly Pretty, and do this kind of layering of the language and the contract into this kind of process of light and color. And these are some pieces that I continue to make. They're big popcorn made out of porcelain with mirrored platinum or gold interiors. But it's this very sort of accommodating form, very organic form that is sort of open. You know, I have these made in Lithuania. It's pretty people I work with don't speak English, but they can understand popcorn, and they can find a model of popcorn easily. And I've worked with it with this piece, which is in Milan, and this idea of this, that there's this material, there's this form that has this implied sort of optimism, but there's often a lot of sort of disappointment involved with it, but it's this form that has this kind of assumed friendliness, but they're really these explosions. And so these were made from a Japanese paper clay that actually, as soon as I bought a bunch, the tsunami hit, and the supply was gone. But it's paper, so it burns really well. And then I had taken them, I just organized them by a degree of burnness. And this recent body of work is the sort of my recent iteration of the multi-unit, multi-strand mobile pieces, where it's made with a very, very paper-thin mirror, and the color component is on the underside of the layer, so you never can see anything directly. So everything, because of the angles of the mirror, there's never anything, the information is always unclear. And this is sort of desire to understand, but it's never really that obvious. And this one that was recently installed in Dusseldorf, I thought I would experiment with like really organizing the color by a palette that was in a book that they tell you what this color system means. And this color system is supposed to be convivial. And so I staggered this color, and then this reflection happened in the install. And I keep thinking I'm almost done. This is a project I'm currently involved with in Vienna at the Museum of Applied Art. And they have an extraordinary collection of decorative art objects. And over the years, they've had artists come and interact with their collections. And I'm developing a solo show and an intervention with this collection, but one of the great things that I've been able to do in this project is to go into their basement and to access stuff that probably one would never see, and certainly, you know, they don't even really want you to see. And one of the things that, this is in the basement library, one of the things that I encountered were these sort of, I don't know, they felt like forgotten toys. And they were stuck in a dark corner, and I pulled them out, and I thought they were so incredibly beautiful. Went in and just documented all of them, and then went through all of this documentation, pulled together a set, and created a chess set that I'm now having people from all over the world interpret. This is from Mexico. They're doing an interpretation. This is people I work with in Lithuania are doing an interpretation. And without too much guidance, I mean, I like to keep it around the same size as the originals. These people in Germany who are really perfect craftsmen. China wouldn't do just one set, you'd have to do a full manufacturing order. So this is my army from China. And then Ethiopia, I'm working with someone in Ethiopia who interpreted, he's doing really beautiful, you know, and another design school in Ethiopia also. And then one of my old teachers from art school I reconnected with, and he's going to do really plastic versions, almost like promotional toys for McDonald's. And he did a bunch of renderings that could maybe even become animations. You know, I don't know, it's sort of ongoing. One of the other things I'm doing, and this is a sample, is a giant, one of the things I've resisted with the tapestries over the years is to never ever use metallic thread, because I think it really has to be white, and the eye has to really be tricked. And so I'm doing, the next tapestry is entirely metallic, so it's like silver and gold and pewter and copper and this kind of tonality. And I'll just talk a little bit about the piece out there, and then I'll be done. And one of the things that, one of the things about this piece, it's very experimental, and it has an engagement with the space that when I walked in, one of the things that I found quite remarkable is this sort of relentless ethereality about the space. It's so bright and heavenly and symmetrical and classical. And that's a contingency for me, that's sort of a component to me, it's something I want to play with in a way. And right around the time that I was really getting into developing the forms for this project, I was unable to continue my studio practice of running for a couple times a week. And I think as a consequence of that, I started to develop a sort of anxiety and insomnia, and I started to think of things at night, like 3 a.m. and terrors. And I also was reminded of when I was a kid, I came into possession of a whole stack of albums as like a 5-year-old or 7-year-old of heavy metal rock music, and it frightened me. And I kept them under my bed, and this was one of them that I eventually got around to listening to it many, many years later. But it was always this kind of dangerous stack under my bed, and kind of was thinking about that in relation to the insomnia that I was having while developing this piece. And so coming into the space, so the colors, the black and the purple, really has a connection to that Black Sabbath album. But then these are sort of installation shots. But this idea of this, what is it to be without any contingency or without any concern? What is it to be something that doesn't matter? Or what does it mean to even have a dissolve, or just this word unmattering was something that was kind of going through my mind, along with this word, well, tiger. Tiger was originally tiger, and tiger being this thing, this kind of thing that is concealed, this thing that's lying in wait. But when Jay got her, he told me that Tiger is a chain of nightclubs in London that have a sketchy reputation, and I thought, well, that's okay, that's part of the project. And then I started to think about it, and I thought it wasn't really the reference I wanted, but time seemed appropriate because it is that time, and that those thoughts that you don't want to know about come forward. So that kind of the word seemed appropriate. And then there's a stack of the kind of loose ends that I wanted to have, and you'll see are there's a stack of pizza boxes, and then my very, very, very old and concert running shirt I thought I would put in there because I got it here, and I got it at the V&A, and it's just barely holding together. But I wanted to have some other thing in there. And the pizza box really talks about the thing that is unmistakable when you experience this piece is a lot of labor. That this is very, very labor heavy, and I know that these people have these very long hours, and I think that's sort of represented by that one meal of, I don't know, 18 pizzas, accounting for that span of work. And that is it, I think. If there's any questions or...
Actually, can I give you the microphone just for the sake of the live stream?
Thank you so much for such a thorough overview of your works. I was really taken by the use of food in many of your projects.
The what?
The use of food.
Uh-huh.
So hot dogs, pizza boxes, mini bars. I was just wondering if that's kind of a device you feel like adds this humor to connect with this group who you're trying to
I don't know. Well, I mean, I think certain foods have a embedded assumption that I think is interesting, and I don't know why that is. And certain foods have sort of an iconicness, and I sort of like that raw material of that. Like the popcorn has, I was saying, it's got this. To me, it's unclear why, but it has a kind of friendliness. But it also has, when I work with people in many different places, there is a commonality that this is something that is so universal. It takes very little explanation, and even within the countries that I work with, and I work with different countries to actually do popcorn sculptures, there's always some sort of ha-ha laugh, like I don't know why, but like it's fun. And it's so weird to me that it's fun. This is fun in Lithuania as it is in LA, and that I don't know. I just think that kind of universalness is interesting.
a lot of your work, you almost seem to seek out these large-scale commissions that are going to potentially be very complicated to fulfill, or could be involve a lot of negotiations with builders or planning commissions and health and safety. How do you enjoy this back and forth, or is it something that
you know, it's interesting because I used to say, well, you know, I really was drawn to art because I was always involved in it, but I would never have to deal with like lawyers or math, and it's become very different in a way. And I think I always wanted to get a big public project. I just kind of wanted to do one. And then that once you do one, you become sort of, you get the attention of people looking for artists to do that. And then for me it became about winning the competition, and then I didn't really want to make it. But it's different. It's interesting when something happens like the stage curtain in Oslo, and you think of all the stuff that I didn't know when the project started. Like I know about fireproofing and all this stuff that is kind of knowledge that I get that I wouldn't necessarily get in the studio making these other smaller works. It's interesting. It's definitely an odyssey, and in the middle of it, it's not always fun. But I have some great people helping me that sort of buffer a lot of that frustration. But it's not something I set out to do, which is also kind of nice, I guess.
Sorry, I think one last question. I was actually going to ask about, carrying on from that, about the relationship between you, the maker, and then when you give over your project to other people, to intermediaries, and the realisation of a large-scale project. Have you found this developing over the years, and how have you responded to this challenge?
I love it. I mean, I love this, but I have a sort of tolerance for, a certain tolerance, not a huge tolerance, but sort of surprises. So, for instance, the people I work with in Lithuania, I came into contact with them through an exhibition where the curators were encouraging artists to work with the craftsmen in the area because they were very good, and these people don't speak any English. So I wanted to make these chandeliers, and I sent them some soap that I had just carved very crudely, and I sent them some sketches, and I left it to their interpretation. And they did things that I wouldn't have done, but I find that their decisions maybe a little bit richer than my own. That there's gestures there that aren't mine, and I find them more interesting than what I would have done. But, I've had other people I work with in Mexico where that isn't the case. It's not good. But there's certain, they got it, and maybe they added something to it, and I find that interpretation also to be interesting content for me, is that there's almost like a collaboration.
The chess piece, these variations between the interpretations of that really very extraordinary Ethiopian images you showed at the end, spectrum.
Yeah, and I don't think I could have art directed that. I don't think, but I like to set up a framework where that can happen. And there's actually some people that I've had to sort of I don't know. It's not that they. Well, for instance, the ones from China, the quality is so incredibly poor that in mass, and in some cases broken mass, is part of the story. And I think that's an interesting story that they would rather save money on shipping than send us something that's going to survive the transit. So that I'm not going to fix those pieces. So it's all those kinds of little things that happen along the way that I think maybe talk about a culture, or talk about my expectation or my disappointment, or those kinds of things. It's interesting.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to have to end there because the program is about to begin. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Pae, for a really fascinating talk through some of your works over the